Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about some wider grip movements, why we do them, and how they help with balancing upper back and shoulder girdle development. And again, I want to point out I'm not saying every movement you do should be wide grip. There are movements that for shoulder health and other issues are actually probably best done with a narrow grip, things like bench pressing. Right? I tend to promote the closed grip bench a lot. Perfect example. I do my floor press as wide grip, but I promote the closed grip bench press, have a lot of my clients train it heavily, and I don't like my guys doing a lot of volume on a real wide grip bench press for shoulder health reasons. But a lot of these other movements, when we start looking at common weaknesses that develop, it's a good idea to do these things. And it's not that they give the best overall muscular development through your whole body, is that they tend to correct certain imbalances that we get that predispose us to shoulder injuries, to having major muscle weaknesses, things like that. I mean, in a perfect example, we could talk about stuff like doing way too many chin-ups and pull-ups and not enough rowing. Okay, that's actually a great way in the long term to end up with shoulder issues. Great way to end up with shoulder issues. And that in no way implies that the pull-up is a bad exercise. It's muscle imbalance. It's a problem. And this is the issue we have with minimalist training and too few movement patterns. And it also goes to show you that it's a good idea to have a good balance between vertical and horizontal pulling. You really do need both for overall development. But one of the things you guys see me doing here early on is going to be snatch grip deadlifts. Now, I've been working on getting these wider. This is from the first day I started using them in training. I haven't messed with these in many years. But they hit your back very hard. Now, obviously, it's still intended as a posterior chain exercise, right? And in fact, it's a longer, much longer range of motion. The wider you go on this, we start turning into a pretty deep deficit, more so than you're going to get on deficit deadlifts very quickly. And one of the things that it does, though, is that it hits the upper back a lot harder. What do we mean the upper back? We're talking about the traps, the posterior deltoids, all of those things. Right, and it's that position, that wide position, and then pulling that heavy weight from that position. Now, it does need to be noted that that's obviously not the only thing you would want to do for those muscles, because why? Well, it's just putting kind of a stretch on those muscles. It's a very heavy stretch and a contraction, but it's not dynamic. In other words, those muscles are not directly moving the weight. They're not moving through their own range of motion, so they're never going to give maximum development. But it does contribute tremendously, and there's a large amount of isometric stress and stress being involved and stretch being put on those muscles. So the snatch grip deadlift is something we can use for upper back development, but that is not the primary reason we do it. Right? That's one of the fringe benefits of it. But I thought I would include it first just because it's early in the footage and it's a bigger exercise. But one of the other things you guys see me doing is going to be really wide grip overhead pressing. Now, I historically have done the really close grip, and you guys have seen me hit some pretty good numbers. Like, I've done 225 multiple days in a row with a closed grip. I've done 227.5 as the heaviest I've hit with a strict standing press using a closed grip. But in my case, I've also had a lot of issues with shoulder mobility. And why do we develop mobility problems? It's not due to lack of stretching. Like that's sheer stupidity. That's not the problem with mobility. Mobility is muscle imbalance, it's muscle weakness. And when you have certain muscles, particularly around different joints that are very largely disproportionately developed over another, a strength imbalance can create mobility problems. Right? It's a strength deficiency. And it doesn't mean that you have a muscle that's weak. It means that you have a muscle that is so overpowered by muscles that are so much stronger that even a strong muscle can be weak. It's a muscle imbalance. It's still muscle weakness, but not untrained weakness. So in the case of me, when I started messing with these, as I started working on my shoulder mobility, I found that I could actually lock these. Because I started getting into problems eventually to where with a narrow grip, I can't lock anything over my head. A dead hang pull-up or chin-up can't even lock me straight with 100 pounds hanging off of it. Stretching it isn't capable of stretching me into that position. Okay, because there's a lot of rolled shoulder happening. There's other things going on there. But that's largely due to having very strong anterior deltoids weak posterior deltoids, infraspinous, things like that, relative to the strength of those anterior deltoids. And when we go to something like a much wider grip here, I notice that it hits the entire shoulder girdle much, much, much more. All right, I feel this tremendously in my side delts. I get a better range of motion, more upper chest, and I don't feel the anterior deltoids doing most of the work anymore. Now, I personally, at this point, I'm weaker on this. I can't do the same weight for as many reps. But over time, I feel like it'll balance out. But again, it's showing signs that I personally have had muscle weaknesses that need to be addressed. But in terms of a shoulder girdle stability, rather than just say, let's move the heaviest weight we possibly can, the wider grip's the way to go. But by that same token, there are guys who have tremendously world-class level presses who do a wide grip overhead. So I think when people who have good muscle balance, the wider grip isn't necessarily a disadvantage. For some guys, it can be an advantage because we are cutting the range of motion down. But you have to have very, very powerful shoulders, particularly side delts, things like that, to make it work. Another thing I've started messing with is snatch grip high pulls. Yes, I know these are early attempts here, and yes, they need work, and that's okay. But I had started with really wide grip upright rows, and eventually went over to the high pulls. Why? Well, this builds the whole shoulder structure. All three heads of the deltoid get worked with a movement like this. It's actually very shoulder safe because we start from that low hanging angle and we stop. We don't come too high. We don't come excessively high. And because of the rotation of the shoulder, it doesn't put us at the same risk of impingements and things that we would have. But when you look at the forces involved, it actually hits just like a wide grip upright row does. It hits all three heads of the delt, including the posterior head, side head, the entire trapezius very, very effectively. All right, this is a phenomenal exercise for just building your entire shoulder. Like guys talk about yoke training. Snatch grip high pulls. And you guys remember even Bugenhagen had said that years ago when he said, look, the rack pull's not the way to build to get that. It's like, but a snatch grip high pull will. All right. And again, you don't have to be super efficient with them. It's a very low skill exercise. Like you don't have to have the degree of technical proficiency that an Olympic lifter has to do something like that and to get all of those benefits from it. In addition to the fact that it just helps make you more explosive. It's an athletic movement, right? We've got good force production. We get hip extension and everything involved. But that wide grip really, really helps build the entire upper back, the entire shoulder girdle. Phenomenal exercise. And also, I've started doing my rows really wide grip. I had been doing for a long time to help with this also, and it helped a lot with rear delts and things. I started doing really wide grip inverted rows, but then I went over to mess with my pin leg rows. Now, a lot of people almost call this a rear delt row because we're pulling to the upper chest. We've got a wide grip. Now, the argument could be made that with this, so like, well, maybe you're getting less bicep. Well, that's true. That is true, and if rows are the only movement you're doing for your biceps, you're not going to have particularly impressive biceps, and I think we all understand that. So are we particularly worried that we're getting a little less bicep? I don't think that we should. It's a point of contention, but I don't think we should. You can always throw some curls in, and you can always do chin-ups or pull-ups, right? If you want the movements that seem to hit the biceps the hardest in all the research, weighted pull-ups and chin-ups. But the thing is, those need to take a back seat. Why? Because what ends up happening is that guys who get too lat dominant, and again, people who do tons of pull-ups and chin-ups and they don't do any rowing, tend to have very high rates of shoulder impingement. This has been noted looking at different athletes. In fact, this has been noted as a heavy problem even amongst stuff like Navy SEALs, guys who do enormous amounts of chin-ups in their training. They have a lot of shoulder issues down the road. But one of the things that we note, and again, look at me, I got really, really strong at weighted chin-ups and I have big lats. But I also had an upper back deficiency. Like I'm a textbook example. I started getting a lot of shoulder inflammation, up in my early 40s. So one of the things to keep in mind if we're going to row, let's go ahead and focus on the upper back, and that wide grip pulling to the upper chest hits a tremendous amount of posterior deltoid, infraspinous, mid-trap, rhomboid. All right, we want to build all of that musculature, and it still works your lats. It still works your lats, but people need to remember your lats are getting hit on all these movements. Your lats get tons and tons of work. It is very, very easy to build big lats. It is very easy to build big lats when you're doing tons of big barbell movements. And I want to remind guys that at the end of the day, if you're not getting quite enough lat development from a lot of those exercises, you put a really, really heavy focus on those wide grip rows and your lats maybe do need some extra work, you can always do some weighted pull-ups. Okay, that will resolve that issue very, very quickly, but we need to keep in mind that from a performance perspective for overall strength in an athlete and long-term shoulder health, you cannot have lats that overpower your upper back, right? It needs to be balanced, or you're going to end up getting hurt or be predisposed to a higher injury risk. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.